Okay, all set. Well, thank you very much. What a wonderful performance that was. What a privilege it is to follow a performance that is that excellent and which so exemplifies the creativity and ingenuity of boys. Just absolutely great. It's a pleasure to be with you at this IBSC conference celebrating the role of the arts in boys' lives in this tremendous, remarkable city. And today I want to talk with you about a range of issues which I, as a psychologist of boys, believe to be central to their well-being. Many of these ideas come from my recent book, Cracking the Boy Code, while others have come into focus since the completion of that book. An important prompt for these concerns came into focus during the research I did for the IBSC between 2009 and 2011 on locating significance in boys' lives. Specifically, I refer to what boys told me was their greatest fear, and how that has affected my work and thinking about boys in the years since. And I'm going to review that point very shortly. At the end of this talk, I have something that I want to give you in keeping with the spirit of making things and in the hope of stimulating further thought and conversation about the status of boyhood. As I am aware that I am among many experts on boys, my talk here will address topics which I think are worthy of a seasoned audience. In the vernacular of my small corner of New England, we typically say with all due Yankee awe, "You're wicked smart." You're wicked smart. So I want to focus on what I perceive to be the most critical issues facing boys and young men today. I've had the privilege of speaking at several other IBSC conferences. At an earlier point in my career, I might have wondered whether my stamina and interest in professional work with boys would persist. Well, it certainly has. It seems to me that our collective work on behalf of boys is more important than ever, and perhaps like you, I find my mind working pleasantly to embrace the challenge of creating good and productive relationships and envisioning how I can use those connections in the interest of boy-centered outcomes. This last concept is a key issue in my work. Along the way, perhaps again like many of you, over the course of a quarter century of clinical work largely focused on boys, I have had to ask myself, for whom am I working? And in my case, I might ask myself, am I working for schools who often refer boys to me? Am I working for the government, for whom I also do a lot of work, a lot of testifying in cases about young people? Am I working for families and for parents in particular, or am I working for the betterment of society in some way? And I don't think that any of those answers is exactly right, because I have started out with a kind of a mission to make the world a friendlier place for boys. And my mission has then really been to work for boys and to be an advocate and a fierce defender of boys in many ways. And certainly the spirit of that type of work, that attitude, informs the presentation that I'm going to do here today. I've also asked myself, what is my aspiration? Am I simply seeking better mental health for boys? Am I seeking to help them create a better path towards success or improve relationships in their lives? Of course, all of those things are true, but as I mentioned to you, something that I learned in my research for the IBSC has stuck with me now for, 8 or 9 years, and I have thought of it often. And those of you who might have been at the IBSC presentation in London, I think it was 2011, would have seen this slide. And I showed this slide because at the end of the 2 days of meetings and kind of focused conversations I had with boys, when I had gotten them to a place where I felt like they could really talk and trust me, I asked them, by the way, guys, what is your greatest fear? And I was very surprised by the answer, and I was surprised by how it rang true for boys from one country to the next. And their answer was this: am I a worthy son? Am I worthy of the opportunity given to me by my parents? Am I worthy of this fine education that I am receiving? Am I living a good and honorable life? And I understood from the answer to that question that it was also my job to work to defend the emotional lives of boys, and as a psychologist, that comes somewhat naturally. But I've taken that to heart, and many of the things that I want to say today are about protecting the emotional lives of boys. It's tempting to adopt a defensive position on behalf of boys. It's tempting to think only in terms of defending them from one thing or another thing, but if we don't find space to encourage the strengths of boys, ways to empower them, to reconnect with the question, what is the greatest aspiration, then I think that we lose the strain of really being of help, of being significant in their lives. And when I've asked myself, what is the point that I want to make here at this conference in Montreal about something that we should really be encouraging in boys' lives, it's this: liberty. And I think that we should think of liberty in this way: their rights of self-determination, their rights to express themselves as they need to, and their ability to make a declaration of personal priorities. Self-determination is the right to shape your life and who you will become. This has been an important strain of my thinking and my work with boys for more than a decade. Freedom of expression is, of course, the right to discuss serious and consequential issues. I think that people are sometimes surprised how interested boys are in talking about serious and consequential issues, and often the problem is that we need a little bit of help in setting the table. And finally, a declaration of personal priorities means that boys will have greater say in how time is allocated, how the time in their life is allocated, and the range of options that are available to them. I derive my understanding of these fundamental rights from listening to boys, because that's what I've done for a quarter century. I've tried to listen to them as carefully as I could. I've tried to decode what they've said. I've tried to understand how to read between the lines. Part of greater liberty for boys is freedom of mind, which means that they will be the beneficiaries of sincere inquiry, that there will be viable alternatives to the trivial amusement which now occupies so much of life for almost everyone. This problem with preoccupation with trivial amusement is a bigger problem than marijuana, alcohol, and to some extent, even problems with sexual transgressions. It is a huge, monumental, socio-cultural problem, and we, this group, very well positioned to address that problem with boys and to talk with them about how they are allocating time in their life and whether or not they're using time in their best interest and in the best interest of society. And time and reason to explore the world outside your head. Because that's a part of being occupied with trivial amusement, is that you are spending so little time doing pragmatic, tangible things that might make a measurable, visible difference in the world. One of the things that I have mentioned in my books and that I have talked about in the various talks I've given on boys is their interest in making the world. I don't mean taking the world, but helping to create the world. Because I think that that's the kind of consequential objective that boys are seeking. That's the kind of dialogue they want to be invited to participate in, and the kinds of activities that are really transformative for them. And if they're going to do that in a meaningful way, there needs to be some visible evidence of their agency. They want to see the effect that they have had on the world. They want to contribute to the visual and functional betterment of their environment. If we ask, how should we give boys agency? Where might we start with an initiative such as that? The visual and functional betterment of our immediate environment is a great place to begin. And they also want to experiment with what social justice means in their lives. It means a lot of different things to different people. I think boys have a lot to say about that, and they want to believe that their thoughts will be translated into changes in the way that they go about their life, and the way that their schools go about conducting the school day, and the way that people relate to one another, and so on. doing good and honorable work. Thomas and James, doing good and honorable work. A life without work, without organized cooperation and a useful social objective, stunts maturity and contributes to eternal adolescence. Those who have heard me speak in the past know that I am emphatic about the role of work in boys' lives. This global phenomenon of eternal adolescence, sometimes referred to as failure to launch, can be traced to a lack of opportunity and the requirement to do purposeful work. Finding good and honorable work for boys to do, certainly by the time they are 10 or 11, is essential. This is not just the task of adolescence. This needs to be manifest in kids' lives at a much younger age when they're able to do things that have a measurable effect on their community, on their environment, that they feel a clear sense of agency. Boasting is what a boy does because he has no real effect in the world. I would like boys to have opportunities to do things that lead to a direct effect in the world, so there is less need to compensate for a sense of not having a purpose, not having some clear sense of usefulness. The importance of art to boys. I'm so happy that this conference is focused on the role of creativity in boys' lives and making things and doing things which are expressive. That lives at the very center of my concerns. Before I ever became a psychologist, I had gone to art school, and I only became a psychologist because living in the New York City area, I was surrounded by kids who spoke a language that I didn't speak and who I wanted to relate to, and I began giving impromptu art lessons in my studio. And it was only about 3 weeks later that I realized I had missed my calling in life, and that what I really wanted to do was to work with children and young people. And I made an about-face and went to graduate school to become a psychologist. Art is important in particular because it helps boys respond to a monoculture. Increasingly important to young people is to differentiate their experience. So one of the things that I love about seeing kids' art is that it helps me to understand the variety of their experience and how to better communicate with them and what it is that they really want to talk about. But I think it's also of critical benefit in terms of their developing selfhood and their development even as citizens. It's also very helpful with respect to the challenge of family enmeshment, because that kind of enmeshment is an emotional burden for most boys, and any opportunity to step outside of that enmeshment is a step toward maturity and the liberty of self-determination. As human beings, we relate to each other more easily through stories, and stories tend to be more important than specific individual attributes. So creative work enhances personal narrative in boys' lives, and it reinforces that the story is ever unfolding and open to interpretation. Creative work enhances that narrative. It makes it more clear. It makes it more objective. It brings it out into the light of day and gives us something to talk about with one another. A person without narrative is cast adrift with no urgency or direction. So one of the critical things about having a narrative is that you have some sense of where it is that you're going. And having a sense of that destination is one of the most relieving things I know to do for a boy between 15 and 18. And because I have been doing this work for many years and writing about these issues for many years, boys come to me from far away, long distances, and people will often say that there's a lot of anxiety because a sense of inertia has set in, and our son doesn't know what to do with his life. He doesn't have any kind of motivation any longer. He's lost his mojo, if you will. And one of the reasons that kids come to that place is because they lose a vision of where they are going. And sometimes we mistakenly believe that the discussion about the vision doesn't need to take place or needs to take place well before kids are at a point of thinking about a university education or their vocation beyond a university education. They got to think about these things early in life because by 11 or 12, they are amped up and ready to talk about these issues with some specificity. And through our conversation, if we can bring a sense of narrative to what it is that they're thinking about, then my gosh, we have done a tremendous job of bringing them closer to fulfilling something, to achieving something that's going to make a significant difference in shaping their identity and their life beyond. Young men in particular are often caught in an endless circling of possibilities with no important destination. And this is the deep and rehearsed learning that comes from a lifetime of browsing the internet, because that's what browsing the internet is about. Being a good citizen. Almost everybody in education has had to deal with changes in the way that the world is ordered, and to some extent these have affected postmodern implications for personal conduct. And where the world seemed ordered and rational, in modern thinking, in postmodern thinking, much less so. Much less confidence in science in the postmodern world, even a degree of skepticism about science. And one of the other things that has affected many boys and young men is their struggle to come to grips with how privilege has affected their lives. And we live in a time where boys are sophisticated and understand that there are many aspects of privilege which have touched their life, but which they have to be accountable for. And the great effect and influence of this discussion has affected almost every area of young people's lives. I mean, I am just amazed at the conversations that I have with boys and young men, kids as young as 12 or 13, where they are able to kind of talk about how their life has been shaped by privilege and how it affects their thinking about many different aspects of selfhood, including sexual identity. And I don't think this is reflected anywhere more than in the kind of psychosexual politics of pansexualism and other emergent ways in which young people are renegotiating their relationships with social order. Along these lines, it's time for a broader discussion about the need for boys and young men to manage the coexistence of empathy and aggression. Because if we're interested in where boyhood and where manhood is going and where it needs to go, we need an open discussion about the coexistence of these factors that exist in the lives of males of many ages. If we want to help boys with being more attentive and being more focused, the single most important suggestion that I can make to this highly experienced body is we should tell the truth. Because there is nothing that makes attention more immediate and local than telling the truth. This is one of the things that I have learned from my quarter century of work, is that whenever the conversation is drifting, whenever it seems to have lost its focus or its meaning, tell the truth. Always tell the truth. And what I mean by that is not that you have to have a complete command of facts, some of which people may disagree about, but you can at least tell your personal truth. You can at least be honest about what you think and what you feel. And you can even present that truth with a sense of empathy and with a degree of kindness that makes it easier for a person to take in that truth and make some sense of it for themselves. There is nothing so interesting as someone telling you the truth about yourself. So one of the secrets to having great group conversations with boys or individual conversations, as I often have in my clinical work with boys, is to bring the truth forward. We also need beneficent discourse, a good conversation. We have to have some way of making conversations feel as though they are relevant and in the best interest of boys. And this is the topic that I began writing about way back some 15 or so years ago when I first began writing books about boys, is how to have those great conversations. When people come to me in a clinical setting, it's almost always the thing that they want to know more about is how can I create great conversations? How can I get him to open up? How can I get him to say more? Well, the first thing we should do is be relevant, which means that we have to have some understanding of who we're talking to and what issues are of critical importance to them. And I don't know how we can know that better than listening as deeply as we possibly can. We have to be truthful. We have to be emotionally generous, and we have to be able to withstand disaffection, boredom, or rejection, because that is how boys are testing us all the time. Whether or not we can withstand those slings and arrows and still stay in there and feel as though, okay, I still want to know you. I still want to connect with you. I want to listen to you. I want to know more. I'm not going to turn away or try to change the subject or do something to trivially amuse you because it's hard for you to open up. It's hard for you to share what's really important to you. An insidious suggestion. I am very enthusiastic about all forms of creative work that boys are doing, including those things that they do that are part of social media and especially on YouTube. I always want to see what kids are creating and what they want to share with other people. At the same time, I am very sensitive to how YouTube and other forms of social media sometimes invite young people to be a part of these activities in ways that are not in their best interest. And one of the most insidious suggestions that I hear is build your brand. Shame on them for that. Shame on them for telling young people to build their brand, because what they are really trying to do is get young people to be not only consumers, but the consumed. How many boys do I encounter now who have created some type of live YouTube programming where people are privy to just watch them move about in their regular life, where they're doing live kind of chat or a live kind of podcast of some sort. And it's dangerous. It seems to me that we should not be inviting people as young as 10 or 11 to brand themselves. Because I think that the concept of becoming a brand is the opposite of being authentic. There is no true form of self-discovery that comes when you're focused on building a brand, because when you're focused on building a brand, you want people to come back and to provide a reliable product for them so that you can never change, you can never evolve, because people come to depend on you for being one particular type of thing. And there's a kind of immediate thrill that boys may get, that people tune into them and people pay attention to them, and they're kind of always struck by how many people are subscribers or how many people are liking the information that they put out. But that is not the same thing as really connecting with a deeper sense of creativity in the interest of discovering your authentic self. What is adolescent depression and inertia? Because I think that it's more present than it's ever been, anxiety as well. And I think that many boys around the age of 16 who were previously hardworking, dedicated students suddenly experience a degree of inertia, and it's confusing. Where is that coming from? Is this a chemical imbalance or some type of social disease that is now affecting adolescent boys? I don't think it is. I think that the answer is almost always the same thing. Time after time, the answer is that there is some degree of existential despair. That's what the answer is. When boys are depressed in adolescence, it is because they have lost their way. And in the world today, there are many, many boys who have lost their way. For years, they were on autopilot, identified with parental goals, until that moment comes when the narrative feels impersonal and it lacks credibility. And kids that have not talked about their personal narrative before that moment hits, they're the ones that get struck, the hardest. They're the ones that feel it the deepest and really don't know where the motivation is gone. The Buddhists have a saying, "Congratulations, you have an enemy," by which they mean this is a chance to work on the taming of your own ego. And I think along those lines, we should think, congratulations to a boy who suddenly experiences a degree of inertia. You're becoming yourself, and your spirit will accept nothing less. So let me help you. Let's worry less about the urgency of getting right back on track and pedaling hard, and think more deeply about the importance of figuring out who you are and where you're going and why you're going there. And along these lines, we should remember that true motivation is never inspired. And sometimes when we try to cure the less spirited among us, it feels like we are saying to them, be more like me and less like you. It can feel like a hostile takeover. Motivation can feel like a hostile takeover. So we should really kind of think hard at these moments about what advice we are providing and what it truly means to motivate someone. Does motivation mean helping young people discover what naturally excites them, activating mind, body, and sense of purpose? Or does it mean this, getting kids to do what does not interest or excite them? I have a feeling that too often it means the latter. It's not that difficult to motivate young people when we're willing to pay attention to their priorities. But to know those priorities, we have to listen deeply, and we have to be willing to kind of get off the program, whatever we think the agenda is, and attune ourselves to what's really important to them. One of the neat things about the arts is that they can break out all over, spontaneously, in all kinds of unanticipated ways. They can become manifest in organizations or at a personal level, within families and so forth. I just absolutely love it. And there are more ways for kids to be creative and expressive than ever before, and they're so good at mastering all those kinds of things. And when I find, and I'm guessing that for all of you as professionals as well, when we talk to young people about those things, they are really all in. They want to really be part of that conversation. It feels like it has great gravity. I mentioned to you at the beginning that I wanted to give you something that I made and which I hope will stimulate further conversation. This small gift is prompted by my local forebearer, the founder of Rhode Island, where I live, Roger Williams. Roger Williams had fled Massachusetts in the early 1640s, fearing deportation and execution in London because he was arguing for the separation of church and state. He fled Massachusetts in the middle of a blizzard, making his way through very rugged woods, and was able to stay alive with the help of Native Americans whom he had befriended during his earlier years in Salem, Massachusetts. Roger Williams, in order to convince the king to allow for a separation of church and state in the new city of Providence, traveled to London, where he became a great pamphleteer, writing pamphlets that would eventually change the way that people thought about freedom of religion, which is what Rhode Island is best known for, as a place that was founded based on freedom of religion. And in keeping with Roger Williams' tone and his fervor, I've written a pamphlet for you concerning the liberty of boys, their freedom of mind, the necessity of truth, the warmth of a benevolent discourse, and the hope for providence. Because I wanted to have a chance to amplify the themes in this talk and to hopefully give you some fuel to deal with big ideas during your time at this conference. And it's a very new kind of endeavor for me, and as my wonderful wife, Jacqueline, said as we were folding and stapling these pamphlets in my office, Jacqueline has helped me with any good thing that I have done for the past 30 years. Talk about speaking the truth. There is nothing that I have done of any worth that she hasn't been a part of. But she said, you know, this is kind of crazy cool, emphasis on crazy. This idea of bringing back a 1640s colonial pamphlet and talking about the importance of liberty in boys' lives. And we have made 600 of these pamphlets, which are available in the back of this hall, and which a number of volunteers have agreed to help distribute at the end of this talk. So I hope that you will please help yourself to one. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, when my book first came out about a year ago, I did many, many radio interviews, often taking live calls from parents. More than 50 interviews with public radio affiliates across the United States, some in Canada. In those conversations, unexpected questions come to the forefront. And one such question is, people want to know, what do I think is missing in the psychotherapy of boys? That's an interesting question to me. And my answer to that question is a discussion of love. There is almost no discussion of love because we perceive that issue to be secondary to how to best control boys. That's what brings boys to therapy. How can we manage and control their behavior? But where love is addressed as forms of respect and acknowledgement, it is entirely consistent with the priorities of boys. And in the same regard, I share my love, my respect, and my acknowledgement of you. What a privilege to be among so many dedicated kindred spirits gathered with the intention of greater excellence in our respective work with boys. Long live the IBSC. Thank you very much.